Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Rendock coming to you live from my school desk that's now at home. Missing you bunches. We're going to talk a little bit more about dividing with fractions today. Today we're going to talk about dividing a unit fraction by a whole number. So let's just do some thinking before we go there. And just like in school, I like to think about, what do we know about division? And in this case, when we see 12 divided by 4, we can think about it two ways. We can think about how many groups of 4 are in 12, or we can think about, let's take 12 and divide it into 4 groups. So division is flexible that way. And, depending on the situation, it kind of tells you what you're thinking about. But either way, if I say how many groups of 4 are in 12, I know the answer is 3. And if I think what is 12 divided into 4 groups, the answer is still 3. So, and I know this week you've already thought about how to take a whole number and divide it into a fraction. Oop, hope you didn't see that. Just pretend you didn't. And in this case, we're thinking about 4 divided by 1/2. So, again, we can think about it two ways. How many halves are in 4? Or we could think about taking 4 wholes and dividing them in half. So, either way, we're going to make a half out of each of those wholes, and then we can count. Here's 2, here's a half, here's a half, half and half, half and half. So 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 8 halves in 4. Isn't that interesting? That the quotient is larger than the divisor and the dividend. I wonder if that'll happen when we divide a unit fraction divided by a whole number like this. So let's think about that. So what if you had this situation where you had to have 1/3 divided into 3 pieces, or divided by 3? The first thing you could think about is how many groups of 3 are in 1/3. Ooh. Yeah, that's a lot to think about. How many whole groups of 3? Well, I know there's no whole groups of 3. There's probably a part of a group of 3, but again, that's a lot to think about. So let's try the other way. What if I took 1/3 and divided it into 3 pieces? Oh, well, I could think about that. So if I have a box, this rectangle, and I have 1/3 of it, so I'm thinking about that piece right there. And then I want to divide that 1/3 into 3 pieces. So I just divide that 1/3 into 3 pieces, but I have to divide the rest of it up as well. And then I want to think about, okay, well, here's the original 1/3. And then I wanted to find one of the pieces when I divided that 1/3 into 3 pieces. So one of the pieces is this right here. And if you look at that picture and you want to name that picture, I hope you're realizing that, well, there's lots of pieces now. So there's actually 9 pieces now. And how many of them are shaded? Just 1. And so 1/3 divided into 3 pieces is, each section would be 1/9 of that 1/3. So that's a lot to think about. And I want you to go back to what you were learning with Miss Coleman the other day. And you learned about something called keep, flip, and change. Let's review that. Because here we had 4, which was what we kept, then flipped. That's the 1/2, so we're going to flip that to 2/1. And then the change is we're going to change the division to multiplication. And then I can just calculate 4 times 2 is 8/1 equals 8. Let's see if that works down here when we're finding 1/3 divided by 3. Well, first I would keep the 1/3, and then I would flip the 3 So then it would be 1/3. The reciprocal is 1/3. And then change the division sign to a multiplication sign. And oh my goodness, this makes complete sense. Because right here, I was finding 1/3 of 1/3. And that's the same as multiplying 1/3 times 1/3. That's just finding 1/3 of 1/3. And if I remember my multiplication of fraction rules, 1 times 1 is 1, 3 times 3, oops, it's not 3, it's 9. Okay? So, let's put this into practice and let's explore some more. If you're working in your book, I'm going to be now working on page 511, if you'd like to work along with me. If not, then just focus on what I'm doing. Okay, this time we've got a word problem. We've got a story. 3 friends share 1/4 pound of package of beads equally. What fraction of a pound of beads does each friend get? Oh, it sounds like a fun thing to do while you're bored and home alone. So, let's see. We've got, let the rectangle represent 1 pound of beads. And we're going to divide the rectangle into fourths. And then divide each fourth into 3 equal parts. So, here's our rectangle divided into fourths. 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. And then we're just going to shade in that 1/4 because that's all the beads we have. We don't have a whole pound. We just have 1/4 of a pound. And then we're going to explore what is 1/3 of that 1/4. So I need to cut it into thirds. And again, we're going to find 1/3 of 1/4, which is the same as finding 1/3 times 1/4. And if I look at that 1/3 of 1/4 piece, I can see that it's just this piece right here. I'm going to color it real heavy. So you can see, I might add a green in there or pink. Oh, there you go. And now look at that picture in that model. And what do you think the name of that one piece is? It's one piece out of how many altogether? 3, 6, 9, 12. So we would call that 1/12. And if we remember our multiplication rules, that makes sense. Because 1/3 times 1/4, or 1/3 of 1/4, would be 1 times 1 equals 1, 3 times 4 equals 12. And let's see if the keep, flip, change that Miss Coleman shared with you works here too. So I have 1/4 divided by 3 equals, okay? So we're going to keep the 1/4. We're going to flip the 3 to find the reciprocal, which means we're going to put the 3 on the bottom and the 1 on the top, and then we are going to change that division symbol to be the multiplication symbol, and look at that. That makes sense because that's exactly what we just did. We found 1/3 of 1/4. And again, we're going to multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1. 4 times 3 is 12. Okay, so we're going to try some more models and see how we do. And if you'd like to work alongside me, I am working on page 515, I believe. All right, and this first problem is 1/5 divided by 3. So we could think about a story to go along with that. 1/5 divided by 3. Maybe I have 1/5 of a cantaloupe left after my sisters and brothers had some, and so I want to think how I could share that with myself, maybe for 3 days. So I want to take that 1/5 and divide it up into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So first thing we need to do is we need to have fifths. So let's think we're going to need to divide this rectangle into fifths. And I remember if I'm drawing fifths, that means I'm going to make 4 lines. Well, those are kind of similar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my fifths. And I'm going to be talking about one of those fifths. And then I'm going to divide that 1/5 into 3 pieces. So I'm going to go across. And remember, I'm finding 1/3 of 1/5. And I can switch it around because of the commutative property. And I'm finding 1/3 of 1/5, which is the same as 1/3 times 1/5. So here's my 1/5, and there's 3 pieces, but I'm only talking about one of those pieces, 1/3 of that 1/5. And so we look at the entire whole now, and we think, what's the name of that one piece? There's 3 here, 6, 9, 12, 15. So now we have 15 parts, and I'm talking about one of those parts. So I'm going to call that 1/15. And so, going with our keep, flip, change, I could think about that as 1/5 divided by 3, which is the same as 1/5 times 1/3, because that's the reciprocal of 3, equals 1/15. Okay, so maybe this time you can look at the example with me and then try it on your own and come back and compare it to my work. And number 4 on that same page says 1/3 divided by 4. So let's think. Do you have a plan? Okay, then I want you to shut this video off and I want you to try it on your own. Remember to look at the work we just did, and then you can come back and turn the video on. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to think about 1/3 divided by 4. So the first thing I need is, well, I need some thirds. And I'm only going to make 2 lines if I'm making thirds. Oh, those are much more even. And then I'm going to think about those thirds divided into 4 pieces. So I'm going to make 3 lines going across. 1, 2, 3. Trying my best to make them even. Okay, now remember, I'm only thinking about that 1/3, and I want to divide it into 4 pieces. So I'm finding 1/4 of 1/3, just that one. So then I'm going to find 1/4 of 1/3. And look at that whole picture in totality, and I see that there is 1 out of, let's count, 4, 8, 12. 1 of those 12 pieces is shaded. So it's 1/4 divided, 1/3 divided by 4 is the same as 1/4 of 3, because remember, we can think of the word of instead of the multiplication, equals 1/12. And now let's use our keep, flip, change on the side. So again, we have 1/3 divided by 4. So then I think 1/3 times, because there's my keep, and then my flip is changing the whole number 4 into the fraction 1/4, and then I'm going to change. So there's my keep, and then there's my change. Change the division to multiplication, and then I can just multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1, 3 times 4 is 12. So how'd you do? I hope you did well. All right, here we go again. This one, 1/2 divided by 2. Okay, why don't you shut the video off and try that one on your own, and then come back and turn it on when you're done. Okay, so 1/2 divided by 2. I'm going to divide my big rectangle into half, so I can think about this half. And then I want to divide it by 2. So I'm just going to make 1 line across. And so here's my half. I'm talking about this half right here. And then I want to find 1/2 of 1/2. Oh, isn't that funny? 1/2 of 1/2. And now when I look at that picture as a whole, I can see that 1/2 of 1/2 is 1/4. Oops, I forgot to write. 1/2 of 1/2 equals 1/4, which makes sense because I can think of the word of, or I can think of multiplying. So let's see if we can do that with the keep, flip, change. 1/2 divided by 2 equals 1/2 times 1/2, because that's the reciprocal of 2. And 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4. So 1/2 of 2, or 1/2 divided by 2, excuse me, is 1/4. Okay, one more. So this problem asks us to think about 1/4 divided by 6. So let's find a fourth first. 1, 2, 3. So there's 1/4. And then we need to divide that fourth into 6. Oh boy, this is going to be tricky. So I'm going to do half first, and then divide each half into thirds. So I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, just like I should have. And then I'm going to think, okay, here's my fourth, and I want to find one of those pieces. I'm finding 1/6 of 1/4. So 1/6 of 1/4. And that is 1/6 of 1/4. And so we want to name that piece, looking at the whole all together. And we can see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces here. So 6, 12, 18, 24. So there are 24 pieces all together. And we wanted to find one of them. And look, that's just exactly as if I had multiplied 1/6 times, or of 1/4 equals 1/24. So again, let's apply the keep, flip, change. 1/4 divided by 6 is the same as 1/4 times 1/6. And think about this. Does it matter that I have 1/6 first here and 1/6 second here? No, it doesn't. The commutative property says I can. And then I multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1. 4 times 6 is 24. And so, if we go back to our thinking in the beginning, when we predicted that each of the quotients would be less than the divisor and less than the dividend, that's exactly what happened every single time. Dividend divided by the divisor equals the quotient 1/15, much smaller than the dividend. It happened again here. The dividend was 1/3. The quotient was 1/12. Again, much smaller. Here we started with 1/2. Quotient was 1/4. Again, smaller. And last we started with 1/4, dividing it into 6 pieces, and each piece was 1/24. And that again is much smaller. So I hope that you are trying to figure this out on your own. And if not, go back and look very carefully and go very slowly through the video. The more modeling you do, the easier it will be to think about these. And think about them as they are just division sentences, just like when we think about 12 divided by 4. Remember, how many groups of 4 are in 12? Or 12 divided into 4 pieces, because that's all division is. Okay, so this was a lot, and I hope that you are thinking clearly about this, and I'm going to hold a Google Hangout or a Zoom Hangout for any questions Thursday afternoon. I hope to see you there. Miss you guys bunches.